get a little bit of dark screen line settings. It's all through travel. Point lines of graph, communication, interference, location, weather panels. It's an adjustment communication that we come in to measure. All places that we go in line conditions, ground centers. It operates the cycles of generation of screens. It processes us to really understand how to modify our settings when we come into our batteries. Batteries extremely important through line conditions of AA or AAA or any line coverage and setting as 6 lines of screen location setting, position over lines of 3 over line, position over 4, and really understand how to use our binaries, transistors, resistors, our light switches, how to use our inventories, and how to use our algorithms. That's what this is in line position location. So the more you come into the VR, the more you see programs around through all levels. You start to see the program settings, and then you understand the importance. You scan things because you start seeing these things. Information locations of everything that you see in frequency. Everybody comes into certain lines of frequencies. Species has to get in line position, how to use the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres, and the location of their highways, especially when they come into their they're in a double digit frame position on all levels. 3 track location lines of 4, 4 lines of position over 3 over pi. That puts them into a double A energized battery. Now that's a double imprint in position location positive and negative. That puts lines of communication settings and travel. Point lines at set locations when it comes into their system of binary correlation. They compute line screen height interference and position travels. They have to really get understanding how to get into their body frame, their track provisions frame, computer operation frames, compute screen lines of frames, height calculations of frames, direct lines into their avatar communication lines of frames, so many lines of line frames, frame communication setting, delta wave correlations, echo chambers, foxtrot, delta, communication interference, tango tango. Process calculation line to shift, lock, and control. Understanding line communication setting, position, and programs. Now, you guys have your test on Wednesday about strengths and weaknesses. Not just you on strength and weaknesses, but how everything around you sees you as the strengths and weaknesses. It's about you understanding what comes in position next through your VR system, because it's always been there. It's never left the system. You're just not ready to see it until you understand what the eye provisions are through cycles. That comes in a spectrum, comes in lights, comes in tractions, comes in fire and wiring. Your position, your brainwaving pattern has to really understand how it correlates in system and travels and coordinates. Puts all communications back in frame interactions. All right, so we're going to go through line signals. Now this is going to set up profit channels. Now, the profit channels are going to set up the graph calculation, screen lines, adaptations of inhibitors, positions over pi. Right, so we're going to go through battery lines and correlation lines of track calculations of clockings. This directs your signals and modification. Okay, track provisions, waiting on cycle. All right, so in that direct signals, strength and weaknesses is extremely important because you should know your strengths and weaknesses, right? That's for you to know, not anybody else. All right. It's kind of like I know myself, but there's always something that I need to adjust. I need to perform. I need to have a prevalent. I need to have an abundance or a manifestation. I understand myself more. It has to do with you and nobody else, right? So there is a strength and a weaknesses because there is a strength in the positive, but there's also weakness in the negative. You put that together. That's the balance of communication that puts everything of force of recognition. You start to identify who you are and track location. All right, it's very powerful. You come to that calculation. So let's go through data box locations, 2 battery line settings and travel, point lines of graphs, and travel communications and calculations. We start with that calculations, right? All right, so we got 2 battery set position programs, 1 center, 1 operation center coordinates, set interactions and direct signals. Calculation 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 position program. All right. Waves, communication screen lines on 4 line cycles and high correlation setting solar sails. Process calculation lines and ground centers into a tubing set location of travels and point lines of communication. Communication lines of flux, line setting, line screen size and interference in position locations to electrical line. Console settings into constellation path that opens all signals in position of a light bulb that tracks this calculation screen lines, adaptation lines of surface and track location intelligence formation. That by equation, right? So we add a data screen in position of 0 correlation, 0 traction, and 0 line center and location system with 3 settings. That process communicates lines of 4 line cycles and a 4 bottom location system of travel, routes and routers, sets lines of 4 line position of gravity. Cross calculation lines, 1 line position location, 1 tither, 1 rotation, 1 crop circle, 1 center, 1 operation. Okay, that my equation. All right, so scales communication lines of battery, and batteries and track calculation lines. So you got communication lines as center core system, which is your center drive. Okay, this is your center drive. That's your center drive. So calculation lines of Saturn and line condition setting. All right, Saturn position. Saturn comes in line center location through the eye circles and line position program. Process calculation 1 ground, 2 line, 3 line rotation. Process calculation line centers. Now the ops system opens all track locations. 3 lines of measure, crosses line and acceleration particle. Goes around the cycles, line center, line position location to its center operation system, and 12 location centers of travel. Points lines of graph, communication lines of 1 setting, 2 line rotation, 3 line rotations, execute line communication, initiate, run program, position. Program calculation line, ground line, center line, communication setting, habits, location, triangulation, and 1 molecule structure design. 3 lines of communication lines of platforms. Process calculation 1 ground centers, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction. Calculate modify 1 center line position location high centers. Operates the cycle line condition setting to XT 3000. Process calculation line direct signals into modification line crop circles and traffications in 1 setting. Right? Now, understanding platforms is understanding sonar and track location of 3 lines of communication. Sun comes in, moon comes in, line position waiting on signal, and the 3 lines of flux location system. In position lines of track calculation lines, we had line position of ground centers and red cycles, red centers, and red rotation line position setting and router. Process cross line signals in position of space lines and modulation lines of 3 settings. Process communication line high interference in the blue line rotations, outline cross line signals location to its system. Position lines over power, we add line condition setting cloak and dagger over cross line condition setting in position of its program that illuminates the graph calculation lines of energy wash line, screen lines adaptation in a 24 line cycle and line position locations into a 3 line cycle generation screen lines of battery reline position of its program and calculation. Okay, coming out through equation line screen. Very powerful stuff. So getting position of battery relays, we had position of 2 powers over generator, 1 position of 2 process of 2 platforms of communication, right? So we had position of positive and lines of negative, cross line conditions across, X line position location negative cycles, process communication going up, process communication going down, direct and redirect, right? Signal line position of center correlation lines of 3 track division lines of patterns line position rotors. Cross line signals, cross line location system, line position location settings, all levels of high center interference and tether, 12 foundation graph lines and 24 line rotation. Communicate the ground high center interference and position programs. Direct lines of 1 in position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4 settings. Cross line conditions of 1 in position of 2 into 3 into 4 line communication. Setting communication in the ground centers operates the cycles line condition setting at an XT 3000 line center location system. Track division lines of 3 cycles, 4 line communication setting position of programs. Down by equation. Through equation, right? Coloration lines of patterns. Let's go through orange line. Fibonacci line screen directs lines over cross line signals and a double imprint position of program, position of travel. Sets communication lines of ground centers. Sets communication operation cycles. 2 programming calculations screen lines adaptations, and 4 channels of operation surface. Flux over screen, flux over pattern, flux over division. Process calculations, green lines, high center interference. We go back into security line division, 1 center, 1 position, 1 center. 1 center operation, 1 center, 1 surface operation location setting. Process communication. Direct and lines of modification lines, we go cloak and dagger, over cross line signals, puts lines of communications back in channel. Line condition setting position of its program, center lines its setting its center calculation. Okay, off signals, path alarms, offline communication of 4 settings, off grid, on grid, and line condition setting of 4 lines of 3 and line rotation cycles of generation. Process communication lines at grounds, center position to its calculation, center lines its calculations ground setting. Sets communication lines, setting location to its crop circles, and set position its atmosphere setting. Communicating interference, 2 panels, core track position. Calculate and modify in 3 line communication setting and track location. Done by equation, guys. All right, so done through cobwebbings, code weaving correlations, set of code tractions. This direction of your binaries that relines its position of its program to your batteries into your transistor resistors, puts you into 3 capabilities, lines communication, your battery reline settings into 3 location setting. All right. Inhibitors over screen into all levels. This puts position lines of the team line into the ship, right? The UFO communications screen lines adaptations of 3 lines of generation screens, solar panels, line direct signals into direct and redirect location to a system to an algorithm. That process calculation white over red, red over yellow, yellow over green, green over blue, blue over black. So we have the yellow line screens, set position of gold screens, and 3 lines of measure that points lines of communication setting to its operation. Triangulate position programs 1, 2, 3, and 3 location centers of travel. Position of process, ground center location of purple. Purple comes in, overcrosses signal in line setting to its infinity rotation surface and traction. Directs modification line cycles, add frames, position lines as setting, sets communication lines as center line communication security lines, 3 webbing line rotations across lines of pi, and generates line conditions sonar. Process communication lines of ground line, security line position over cross location of screen settings. Process communication high center interference, position lines at green centers, sets correlations in position in center position at 3 lines of communication ground centers at 1, ground centers at 2, ground centers at 3, and 1 position magnetic highway line screen into inhibitor position of program and calculations. Directing line signals, cross line signals. Now we go through the black line screen line, adaptation 1 surface, 1 center, 1 position, 1 operation line condition setting, XT 1000 line set location, XT. Position over 1/3. That puts 1/3 over graph line and has 6 lines of measure. 6 correlation lines of 6, 6, 6, and 6 line communications, 2 panels, core line, center interference, 6 lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Process calculation of ground centers. Circle line communication setting position XT 1000 line center XT 3000. Waiting on the location XT 6000 and line condition XT 9000, line condition 12,000 line rotation, surface and traction. Done by equation. All right. Directing modification lines of cycles generate the screen lines that put wires and inhibitors in 3 track divisions and cycles. 3 wires, 3 program locations setting the data ports, line position programs, sets communication setting, and all communication setting to travel. Sets communication ground centers operate the cycles. 1 center, 1 position, 1 process, 1 calculation, 1 green line, 1 reader lighting the location system and travel point lines of communication. Process calculation line sending cross line signals. Open crop circles and line sending high interference into 1 center position at 3 lines of calculation of flux, 3 lines of communication to its position of its program. Calculation line screen adds platforms at 1, 2, and 3, and 4 set locations. 4 generation lines as cycles, high center, high interference, sun and the moon. Process communication line grounds, high operation line surface, puts all operations set locations and settings in planetary surface and traction. Directs modification line cycles, 1 center line position location, flux, sonar line communications. Okay, so we go through one lines of 6 and the line center high interference. That puts lines communication in 1 center, 1 position over tractions. 6 lines of correlation, 6 lines of settings, puts 12 line center rotation surface. Dimension lines of correlation, and then we come into the energetic dome. The 3 line splits into fire and wiring, track position lines of cycles. Record this center to its plasma wall screen and directification plasma using settings. This goes into fractions over grids that position its program. Spider ops, spider tracks, spider communications, spider interference, spider line conditions, code webbing, code tracks, line settings, and position measure. That coils the setting line rotation surface into highways. Omni communication setting, process communication lines, blossoming and location surface, and track visions of cycles of generation. Done by equation. All right, very powerful stuff, guys. Boom, done. Okay, center communication lines of grounds. We have position lines. Now run 14 lines of communication, 14 lines of measure, sets lines of 0, 7, point lines of 2 atom line rotation, surface and tractions. So we have one line equation lines of 0, add correlation lines and set location of 0, 7 correlation setting 0, 0, 7, and process calculation 1 setting, 1 operation surface in position XT 3000 and traction. Process communication ground lines is 0 line settings, 0 operation, and 7 correlation. Set lines is 0, 0, 7, process lines of ground, process lines communications, cross position location line setting, position of travel. Direct lines of power generate the communication line setting, add position location of tether in position of router. Setting communication lines of ground communication position program. Okay. Process calculation 1, 2, 3 in position location 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of inhibitors, 3 lines of cycles, 4 line position. 3 lines of communication, 4 lines of cycles, 3 lines of communication screens, and 4 lines of position of travel. Setting communication high ground line center, location of solar sails, solar line rotation surface, and track location of platforms and calculation. Done by equation. Very complicated stuff, very confusing, right? Process communication lines, energetic dome. There's a dome line rotation, spin cycle, rotation surface. Puts process communication settings back in traction. Direct modification lines is center lines. Puts lines communication general AI, space line communication programs, set location of space-time operations, calculation. Wind cycles, one center, one surface. Flux over line, flux over screen. Calculation lines of high center interference, in-trial position of point lines of time center, time graph calculation. Cross line conditions in one cycle, one surface, one track location. Fibonacci line settings in a 45 line split. Cross locations in another 45 line split. Process calculation of lines of north, south, line conditions of north, east, and travel. Points lines of center, one surface, one track location. Positions over power, three lines of communication setting position of program. Communicates high center interference and position location that routes its routers, line connected to its moon, and process location to its sun, and projections over screen, over pi, and track location. That by equation. All right, that's all done. All right, so the center position location is now set up in line setting position of program, right? Process communication settings, bring line communication setting to green line cycles, one center, one surface, one center, one surface, one center, one surface, and three line position of patterns. Setting cross line screens, setting adaptation lines of surface and set locations. Process communication setting. Three lines of communication, right? Bringing the X3000 as security line, going cross line signals, going on location grid line screens, right? Cross line disappears, and then reappears and travel. Point lines of graph, okay? Sets communication lines of ground centers, open signals, open modification center and travel, point lines and wormholes. Sets communication lines of a half pipe and rotation surface and tracklocations back to the moon in position of program. Process calculation line ground lines, high center interference, overcrosses screen lines adaptation of surface that puts position of programs in position lines of travel and point line communication. That my equation. All right. Standard communication graphs, we go through battery line settings. So Mercury. Mercury sets position of programs. Position lines of travel. Mercury 1, Mercury 2, Mercury 3, and Mercury 4. Infinity line position of box centers, line conditions of data. Position lines of correlation setting of Pluto, and position of Jupiter, line conditions all levels of Neptune. Sonar communication lines of two-track location line height interference location of the sun, and process the communication of the moon and projections over screen over pi. Position lines of power, generate the communication cross-line signal Xbox, data formation line screen location of three lines of inhibitors over 4. Process communication ground centers, operations surface to XT3000 setting. Process communication lines of platforms at 3 line rotation surface. 4 lines of connections in position of northeast, northwest, and north-south set location. Position program, 1, 2, 3 lines, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and position of 12 set location. Done by equation. All right, it's all set. Okay, measure on scales is a balanced center. Now this process communication, so we're at 18 lines of channel. Sets position location settings. It goes lines of high center interference into 15 lines of volume. 2 lines of tractions, 2 line division, 2 line centers, and 2 surface locations. X lines of 1. Calculation of dx. Dx lines of 2x, 2 lines of x lines of 1, 2x lines of 0, point lines of decimal lines of 1. 15 over lines sets position of travel lines at 18 position of 4 lines into 50 core track position of cycles. All right. So we take 1850 sets location setting to 1 line cycle, 1 8 center, 1 cross location, 1 0 line rotation surface. Process communication lines to ground lines, 2x lines of 1, and process calculation lines that consuming position of program. Communicate lines higher center, 2 line position of program line cycles, line position of program setting. Communicate back and center, back and surface, back and triangulation. Let's go through white cycles. 1 center rotation, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 location. Process communication line ground lines. We set communication set lines of high calculation black surface. So we go through space modulation line connection equals line connection, time sequence line connection, all levels, flux line communication, program line position location, line centers, 3 line communication of 4, 4 lines of 3, 3 lines of 4, 3 lines of 4, 4 lines of 3. Platforms of 3 line cycles, 4 generation screen lines, and high center interference and graph communication setting. Process communication lines and direct signals. Now the binary line condition set in position of its battery. Set communication to its position of its program. Battery 1, and we got battery 2 and track locations. Right? Process communication line center of its operations surface. Now we can XC1000 goes into the center operation line, connects the setting position of its program. Sets communication line crosses line at 3 lines of tether in position location of 4. Sets lines communication lines at in, out, and audio and track location. In, out, and audio track location. Platforms is setting of the sun in position of the moon in cross location. Right? Moon sets line communication to a bigger line, screen lines of sun position of router. Sets cross line centers to the sun and moon, waiting on signal position location. Process communication lines at grounds of one platform in position of 2 line settings, 3 cycles, linking its setting position of its program and communication. All right, so correlate the high interference, upgrade cycles, line generation, line conditions, and position location of system and console. That my equation. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm just adding platforms of communication, sending binary lines to your batteries. Okay, so we got a 3-track division, 3 lines of A, and set locations of A, B. Okay. Okay, so let's put position lines of 1A track, line conditions lines of 2 panels, cross line signals, lines of Xbox, location setting, and point lines of graph communication position and program. So we had an A-track division lines of 2, A-track division lines of setting in position of center operation data. Cross lines of A, position lines of B, balance communications, equals lines of DX in position of A, equals lines of DX1, a process, 1 ground centers, 1 0, 1 setting, 1 position calculation. Right? All right, so we set position AAA into 3-track divisions and titles. Title line, position of 4-track location. Process lines of 1, 2, and 3 settings to travel. Process line conditions at 1 center, 1 rotation surface and track location. The XC1000 comes in, sets position 1, 2, and 3 settings rotation. Communicates to ground centers, operate the surface, overcrosses line screens and high center interference inhibitors over 1.6, over 1.8, over 110, over 112, 124, and a half pipe location sending of travel line settings back to the ground set location. That my equation. Setting communication lines as screens sets lines of position of patterns. Now this allocates position of time frame. So we take position of 22 line cycles, line condition setting into a measure, equals lines of 2 line position programs, split lines of anomaly of space and lines of time, split line of anomaly space lines of time. So we got 2 panels, 4 settings. We got 2 panels, 4 settings, space and time. So we got collocation lines of 3 equals lines of 4, lines of 7, lines of position of 12, and position 24. We had 48, we had 72, we had 144. Sets communication line ground lines and settings of 4. Sets position location line connection setting as Z line rotation, 7 correlations, 2-track position, 4 calculations, 0 line conditions of 4 settings, 2 line position of 7 lines of router. Process communication lines of highest interference of 3 lines of panels. Process communication lines XT3000 sets 3 lines of 4 lines of panels and tracking measure. Balance communication ground setting line condition setting open all signals into energetic dome screens as application calculation. And my equation. Setting communication lines as screens opens all cycles. Now putting that position lines of travels puts everything in graph calculations. Process calculations, we go through 1 lines of cycle. Let's go through 23 equals lines of 3, 1 on line rotation. Then we add 14 lines of channel. Now the channel communication has 3 lines of volume, 3 lines of cycles, 1 line cycle. Equal line correlation setting and cross line signals, 1 indicate over line crosses, line down cross communications. Binary lines of 0, 0 line position, triangulation line position of flux and communication. Cross line signals, 1 position location, cross line signals. Cross line signals over line communication, position of program. Sets communication grounds in position of power into the atmosphere lines at 23 lines at 31 line measure. Position lines of correlation interference in a 4 line condition setting in a 3 line communication of 7, 12, 24, 48, 72, 144. Track division lines of cycles. Battery reline positionments programming position location calculations. Ground centers of 1 and position across lines of ground lines of 2 and line position locations. 2-track division lines of cycles and then calculation, right? So calculation of spacing line in position location program setting in rotation in position of 4 line cycles and tubing in rotation surface and traction. Direction modification line, high interference, high position program calculation lines and platforms this way. Going left line in position of right line, in position of left line, in position location of right line, in position of travel, point lines of communication. Ground centers line and operation line, location setting, the earth line position of calculation, modification, interference line, position program calculation. Down equation, right? So all tubing lines is charge mechanism line condition setting and 2 battery line condition setting. So we got 2 batteries. Okay, 2 batteries on signal. Okay, set position 1, setting position operation. Cross line, down line, up line signal, down cross line, up line signal, location setting. Process communication lines of 2 in position of 1, in position of 0 into 1, in position of 0 into 3, in position of 4 into 7, set calculation. Cross communication high ground lines 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 3 cycle lines and 1, 2, 3 waving panels of solar sails and track calculation done by equation. All right, so mechanism over pi puts everything in an algorithm. Now we do the inventory line ground lines in a 7-line position equals lines of 12 and 12 line cycles of 24, add location lines of 2 tractions and 2 lines of 11. Line equals lines of 4 panels. Line conditions setting 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings and travel. Points lines of graph, point lines of system, point lines high center interference, magnetic high line communication setting position of this program and calculation. Communication ground centers, 1 split lines of anomaly, 1 power, 1 generation screen, 1 earth line settings. Platforms 1, platforms 2, platforms 3, and lines of tether and track location. Process communication lines high center interference, 1 setting, 1 operation, 1 circle, 1 set locations. Ground centers operation lines of platforms 1, 2, and 3, position location 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Done by equation. That's it, we're done. So all the other than left line communication setting is a 3-track provision and triangulation of molecules, 3-line communication programs and ISI location setting, process calculation screen lines, set adaptation lines of team line sequence, sets position location line calculation inhibitors, line position of 12 over 24, sets communication over pi, generate the communication lines of 3 over 4, 4 lines of 3, set location of travel point lines of graphs, calculation of 1, setting high interference, 0 line position location of 3 lines of measure, position lines of program location setting to travel. Sets communication high center species line, puts lines of 2 batteries, line conditions setting, routers and routers, line position 1 program, 1 position, 1 calculation line screen, adaptation lines of surface. Puts crosses communication lines of team line cycles into 3 batteries in position program and calculates modification interference location of 3 A tracks and set locations. Done by equation, we're done. That's it, we're done. All right. A lot has been said. I had to do that very, very fast to know exactly what's going on with your track location, your measures, puts everything in scale, puts everything in communication with system, location, of travel. All right. All that's done through equation, right? Through species line, correlate your high interference to 2 battery read line conditions that set positional program location setting to the vessel, location to the pods, location to their vehicle, setting communication high center interference to 2 battery location settings, right? The energized communication position of program, massive calculations, direct lines of the team line and cycle line communication set of 3 A track location provisions into all levels of Duracell. Position lines of power, generate communication lines of 3-line rotation surface and track locations. Operation lines of 1, operation lines of 2, operation lines of 3, and tractions. Operation lines of 1, operation line of 2, location setting with species communications. All right? Adios. Doo-doo.